In part 2 of our Combating Procrastination program, I'll walk you through the paces of how to stay out of the procrastination blame trap, develop confident composure, and build a can-do outlook and behavior that goes with it. What we'll do is we'll consider 5 main areas. Who's to blame for procrastination? Why you can legitimately ditch the label procrastinator. In other words, I'll show you why you can never be a full, complete, total procrastinator. It's impossible. Making a radical shift will follow, and we'll get into how to alter procrastination patterns through a self-observant approach. And this way will apply to thinking, feeling, and doing activities to move towards becoming the more efficient and effective person that you know you can be. And fourth, we'll get into replacing a procrastination habit with confident composure that grows out of a self-observant view and then leads to point 5, which is building confident composure with a challenge outlook. And it goes the other way as well. If you have a challenge outlook, which comes from your self-observant shift, then it's easier to build confident composure and build on a momentum which will get you going in the way that you want to go. Throughout your life, you've been brainwashed to give and avoid blame. So it's not surprising that you live in a blame culture where blame, like the air, is practically everywhere. Blame does have benefits. In its basic form, blame refers to accountability. You back in your neighbor's parked car, you bear the responsibility. Now, if we stuck to this level, we'd all be the better for it. But as practically everybody knows or suspects, blame has a huge downside. It's often an expression of bitter criticism and condemnation, and a lot of people strongly prefer to avoid that. At the extreme, blame extends into hatred and genocide, but that's a topic for another time. Blame is woven into our national fabric, and you can't do very much about that. But you can avoid blame trap thinking when it comes to taking steps to improve following through on what's pressing and important for you to do. Now, to avoid needless self-blame in the area of procrastination, let's look into some of the natural causes for procrastination and a bottom line issue. First of all, you have a natural tendency to procrastinate. Like it or not, that's just the way it is. So it's not your fault if you have a tendency to procrastinate, no more than it's your fault if you have a tendency to get the common cold more often than your neighbor. Second, we have a natural built-in tendency to approach what's comfortable and avoid what feels uncomfortable, and that includes performing social and personal responsibilities we're not happy to do. Third, discomfort-dodging procrastination typically follows and leads to more discomfort and a pileup of pressing things to do. So if you have a natural tendency to avoid uncomfortable circumstances, but you also recognize that they're significant, pressing, important priorities, discomfort dodging hardly is going to get you where you want to go. But nevertheless, it is a natural tendency to do this, and knowing about that process can be useful in taking corrective actions. And without that awareness, you may simply slide into the same pattern. In any event, the bottom line issue is that regardless of whether or not procrastination tendencies are natural, it's your responsibility to do better if you intend to take charge of yourself and of the controllable things that take place around you. It's easier to take corrective actions when you're not wasting your time burdening yourself with self-recrimination, excuse-making, or blaming others for your procrastination. I think it's far better to correct than to condemn. Focus on what you can do and progressively master the techniques that are oftentimes necessary in order to develop the effectiveness that you personally would like to have so that you can add material to that autobiography that'll be quite interesting. So let's turn to how procrastination is something you do, but not the entire essence of you. Although you may sometimes procrastinate, logically you're not a procrastinator. Let's see why. For example, you can stand up in front of a group and say, I'm a procrastinator. Does that make procrastinator your identity? Are you only one way, only one thing, a procrastinator? Does it mean that you can only procrastinate or become a non-procrastinator and nothing else? That form of categorical thinking can be a trigger for painful negative emotions. A lot of people end up feeling very down on themselves, doubting themselves, because they identify with a label. If you identify with the label procrastinator, can you also identify with other roles, such as professor, student, manager, spouse, writer, or whatever? None of these, I can guarantee, fully describe you. They may describe roles and what you do. Nevertheless, it's pretty much of a natural human tendency to categorize. You see this categorization everywhere. If it's not McDonald's, it's Burger King. If it's a butterfly, it's not a fish. If it's an animal, it's not a birch tree. But if you tend to think categorically, you can obviously label yourself any way you choose. Pejorative labels, though, such as procrastination or procrastinator, invite castigation, and castigation is often a distraction from enlightened forms of self-correction. However, you're free to beat up on yourself with a label, even if it leads to negative feelings. You also can think pluralistically about yourself. You procrastinate periodically, but you're also a person who's capable of experiencing hundreds of variations of a few basic primary emotions. Lassitude is a complex emotion. The list goes on and on. You can actually see variations within categories. Anxiety has anxiety over getting in front of groups of people and speaking. Anxious over looking like a person who's inept in public. Anxiety over possible physical harm. Anxiety over driving on a roadway and possibly having your car slip out of control. So a lot of worries, anxieties, and variations on those themes. There are also different dimensions to your intellectual abilities, and you may have as many as 120 different forms of intelligence. You may have creative ideas or prefer to base your actions on what are familiar. Indeed, you have literally thousands of different traits and tendencies that appear in different ways under different circumstances based on how you perceive circumstances. You have millions of different learning experiences, some of which come about or came about in one trial and other through long-term efforts. Therefore, if you think pluralistically, it's impossible for you to only be one way a procrastinator. That means you have to exclude everything else and focus on only one label. Now, there's no federal law to say that you cannot label yourself a procrastinator. However, if you think of yourself as a procrastinator and identify with the label, you have an excuse to avoid taking corrective actions. You have a good reason to continue to procrastinate. You are, after all, what you are, a procrastinator. From a personal development standpoint, by viewing procrastination as a process that includes changeable thinking, feelings, and behavioral features, you've targeted areas for self-improvement. You're in a far stronger position to take a no-failure approach for correcting procrastination, thinking, emotions, urges, and behavioral distractions, such as watching TV as a report gathers dust on your desk. With a no-failure approach, you start with a goal, something you've put off that's pressing and important to do. You devise a plan to engage this activity, preferably as a challenge. You press yourself into action whether you feel like it or not. You see what results from following the plan. Using this no-failure approach, you evaluate your plan, the way you execute it, and the results. You find out what works, what doesn't, as you take the steps to get past procrastination barriers. You make adjustments. So what in fact you've done is you've eliminated failure from your life, from a self-development standpoint, that is. Clearly there's objective failure. If you run for a political office and your opponent wins, you fail to achieve your objectives. That's just the way it is. But from a self-development standpoint, when you're seeking to find ways that work for you so that you can become the more effective you, that's mainly what the purpose is. The bottom line, you can choose to label yourself a procrastinator. You can focus on making changes in the procrastination process to do better. Or you can straddle both extremes, or you can kind of go from one extreme to the other from different times. But if you choose to work on breaking procrastination patterns by taking steps to be a more efficient and effective you, this takes a radical shift. I'll turn next to how to change direction from a self-absorbing procrastination style of one of using objective self-awareness skills. This is what represents the radical shift. Once you get yourself past the categorical thinking trap of thinking of yourself as a procrastinator, you're ready for the next step on the path of freedom from needless delaying. On this path, you make a radical shift from self-absorbing procrastination thinking, feeling, and doing to a productive path grounded in objective self-observations and the acceptance of the fact that to do better, you're going to have to act better. Fortunately, you can guide yourself to that path and guide yourself along that path. So let's see how. In a procrastination mindset, you're inclined to draw into your attentions and see things in a little bit of a different way than you would when you're operating more objectively. For example, procrastination thinking can be misleading. You operate with the illusion that later is better, or that timing isn't good right now, or that you have to let the thought season a bit more. or you need to take a nap, or some such thing like that, which supports the later is better view. You may also believe that you can't succeed, and this thought leads to other thoughts of finding an easier and safer path where you can avoid your tensions. These paths, unfortunately, are easy to come by, and they typically take very little thought. For example, it doesn't take a lot of thought to decide to take a nap than to begin a long overdue report. On the self-absorbed path, you're likely to come to know more and more about your worries and troubles and how to avoid what you feel uncomfortable doing. You gain a lot of experience in this avoidance process, but unfortunately you're going to come to know less and less about how to get unstuck, and perhaps not about what you're actually capable of doing. As you can imagine, your interpretations of reality are affected by your expectations and your mood. However, too much inner reflection can also be a form of procrastination. Your sense of identity, or what makes you special, can get absorbed in such things as your discomfort, fears, uncertainties, your worries about not meeting your own high expectations that you might hold for yourself. All of this is part of a self-absorbing procrastination thinking, feeling, acting process. Luckily, you're not condemned to spend your life absorbed in procrastination habit patterns. At any time, and I mean any time, you can start to make a radical shift from self-absorbent preoccupations with the discomforts that you experience, which translate into delays, to a objective self-observant way of thinking and knowing. So what is objective self-observation? This is where you think about your thinking, ferret out bias from fact, accept discomfort as a natural part of learning and living, and act to gain traction in fulfilling your commitments and obligations, both to yourself as well as to others. Ferreting out bias from fact is usually pretty straightforward. If you operate with the tomorrow illusion, which is that later is going to be better, then you take a look and see how often has it turned out that later has really been any better than today. And more often than not, it really isn't. So the fact is that making a projection for a happier later to do something which you may not particularly want to do today typically is falsifying reality. Now, the degree to which you can profit from self-observation largely depends on the accuracy of your self-observations. So how can self-observation be objective? After all, isn't this sort of a subjective state of being? Do we not see things as we wish? There'll be some subjectivity in whatever you do, but you also can be more self-observant in a more objective way. Now, what does self-observation mean when you're being more objective? This means probing your procrastination expectations, for example. If you keep putting off what's pressing to do, how are the results of this action likely to affect how you feel, think, and later do? That'll give you a sense of how a self-absorbing view leads to more procrastination. You can also raise a different question with yourself that's geared more towards objective self-observation. And through this question, you've taken a step to map the outcome. For example, think about plausible alternative views and their consequences. If you push yourself over the threshold of inertia and onto a productive path, how might this shift affect what you think, feel, and later do? By taking steps to establish this contrast, you put yourself into a better position to choose direction between absorbing yourself in a status quo procrastination pattern or making a radical shift to a self-observant way of thinking, feeling, and doing. Chance only favors a prepared mind. When you've objectively thought about what you do when you procrastinate, you may unexpectedly discover opportunities to get unstuck from negative thought themes, emotional reactivity, and behavioral habits such as automatically diverting yourself into safer behaviors that are going to get you off track. The same is true for an objective self-observant view. If you know what the process is of observing yourself in an objective way and then making shifts and changes, you may come to discover opportunities that you hadn't seen before, and these opportunities may lead you to what I call confident composure. We turn to that issue next. Confident composure is an attitude of mind that you can acquire through developing and using your objective self-observation skills. It's also an attitude that stands on its own. So what is confident composure? This is a recognition that you can directly command only yourself, and you choose to do so. You don't demand that the world change for you, and you don't need it to. With this softer but stronger view, you can better influence the controllable events that take place around you. Your psychological resources are available to diffuse, finesse, or directly manage conflicts, including a conflict between self-absorbing ways of thinking and doing and self-observant ways of thinking and doing. Your productive actions are driven by emotion. Your negative ones are as well, but here the effort is in terms of getting things done rather than avoiding things that can be done. Believe that you can apply your talents and learn new ways to advance your enlightened self-interest, and you're operating with confident composure. You'll notice that with the development of confident composure, you'll naturally procrastinate less. That's because you're going to be busily adding quality stories to your autobiography, because you will be procrastinating less. When you operate with confident composure, you'll have greater emotional freedom to meet challenges. You'll also feel less stress due to imaginary threats such as feeling overwhelmed by anxiety over discomfort, remorse over procrastination, and so on. But you'll still feel stress when it comes to following through on what's pressing and important to do. As you'll see, each form of stress is remarkably distinct. A threat outlook, as may come from a self-absorbent perspective, connects with vascular system restrictions that reduce your coronary efficiency and raise the risk of procrastination and more of the same stress from threat. So when you feel threatened by whatever the activity is, either because you fear the discomfort, fear uncertainty, fear the activity, or whatever, you're likely to feel the kind of stress that comes from threat. An objective, self-observant process is the mirror opposite. Yeah, sure, you'll feel stress, but this is more of what's called an effort stress that comes from meeting challenges. And you can tell the difference when you really tried hard to do something and you dug into it, and sure, there was frustrations and there was stress, but you also felt a momentum to continue going. This is more of an example of effort stress. In this type of mode of thinking, you look at problems as opportunities to develop healthy problem-solving and coping skills. By creating and meeting challenges, found a time-proven path to accomplishment. This type of challenge outlook links to higher levels of coronary efficiency, clear thinking, emotional resilience, which is the ability to roll with the punches, and confident composure. In Part 3, I'll continue with how to boost your efficiency and effectiveness, build confident composure, and add quality to your autobiographical experience. Here you're going to learn 7 principles for effectiveness and change from the work of the Prussian military strategist Karl von Clausewitz. I abstracted these principles from his book on war and found that they apply very nicely to war against procrastination. Let's turn to the 7 principles next.